Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning into my channel. I'm here with Heidi Olson. Hi, Heidi. How are you?
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm really glad to have you. So on my channel, I describe all aspects of sexual exploitation, pornography use and abuse, human trafficking, prostitution, and related issues. And I speak to people from all around the world, literally academics, scholars, activists, filmmakers, survivors of the sex industry, and people that work in mental health and or in healthcare like Heidi. So Heidi is an RN, and she's a certified pediatric nurse, pediatric sexual assault nurse examiner, which is SANE, interesting acronym, SANE. And lately, founder and president of Paradigm Shift Training and Consulting, which equips healthcare workers with skills-based training to identify human trafficking and exploitation. Heidi has a wide range of experience in pediatric and forensic nursing and is taught as an adjunct clinical instructor for the University of Missouri at Kansas City, where she lives, and the University of St. Mary's. Heidi previously managed the SANE program at Children's Mercy, Kansas City, where she performed and reviewed over 1,500 pediatric sexual assault cases, many of them trafficking cases, and has communicated with law enforcement, Child Protective Services, or CAS in Canada, and a large multidisciplinary team, as well as educated hundreds of staff members on relevant topics regarding sexual violence. Heidi serves as an expert witness for the prosecution during trials for victims of sexual assault. In 2019, Heidi implemented an evidence-based screening process in the emergency department, which has resulted in hundreds of vulnerable children being identified as victims of exploitation. Heidi started and leads the human trafficking work group at Children's Mercy, presents with the Anti-Internet Child Exploitation Team, a Canadian nonprofit. Oh, a Canadian nonprofit. Okay.
Yep.
Great, thanks. It's great to work with our American neighbors. And organized Empower KC, a community event to raise awareness about sexual exploitation in Kansas City. Heidi has testified in favor of bills that have been passed into law on the state level, and most recently testified at a briefing on Capitol Hill about protecting children online. In the last few years, Heidi has presented over 200 times internationally about recognizing human trafficking, child-on-child sexual assault, pornography, and exploitation. Heidi has been featured in several documentaries, including Vulnerable Innocence, which has won 24 awards. Most recently, Heidi won the Cry Purple Award, which is given to citizens who are doing outstanding anti-trafficking work in their communities. Congratulations on that, Heidi.
Thank you. Thanks.
So as I said earlier, I've been wanting to interview Heidi for a couple of years now, and I've known her just in sort of the circles I travel in at different conferences and events. Her names come up, and I've been really interested in her work. So Heidi, why don't we just start with giving us a bit of your background and what led you to start Paradigm Shift. Let's start with that.
Sure. So I was actually thinking about this morning that if you had asked my 22-year-old self in nursing school, when you become a nurse, do you want to stand up and talk about pornography and
Hard no.
sexual violence? Right. I would have run for the hills and been like,
Mhm.
never, absolutely not. So
Yeah.
it always shocks me and surprises me, when people are like, I've heard your name, because I'm like, I did not set out to do this. It's one of those things where I saw it happening and felt like I cannot stay silent about this. It feels unethical to me to just watch these trends that we're going to talk about unfold before me as a frontline worker and say nothing. So
Yes.
I know we'll get into it, but I started to notice some very alarming trends with kids that I was taking care of as a sexual assault nurse. And so my background, long story short, is I'm obviously a nurse. I've always worked in pediatrics. I actually
Yeah.
grew up in southern New Mexico, which is near the Mexico border, and worked as a nurse there.
Okay.
No one talked to me about trafficking, pornography, really even child sexual abuse. I mean, nothing. As a nurse, I had no context for anything related to any of these crimes or issues.
Yeah,
I
I
ended
guess
up getting
there's zero class time in nursing school given to
right.
this issue, correct?
Exactly.
Mhm.
Especially, I mean, if we're talking about pornography, I mean, jokes might be made about it in
Jokes,
class, and
jokes.
that's about it.
Okay.
Um, so I moved to Kansas City. There's an opening to become a forensic nurse, and it sounded really intriguing to me. So I applied for that and then ended up about a year and a half into it leading our program. So I started seeing these really concerning trends. I led the forensic program for about 5 years and then decided to branch out on my own.
Can you
Sorry.
explain, sorry, yeah, sorry, can you explain what a
Yes.
forensic nurse is for people that don't know?
Sure. Yeah,
Um,
great question. And yes, I'm a fast talker, so just interrupt me
I-
if you
Okay,
need
I
to.
will.
So essentially, if someone is a victim of a crime, especially sexual assault, it's important for forensic evidence to be collected after a crime like that to be able to corroborate a victim's disclosure. Of course, if someone says they were sexually assaulted, I 100% believe them, but our criminal justice system isn't like that. We have to have evidence to prove
Yes,
that it happened. So there
yes,
are special nurses who have been trained to know how to collect forensic evidence off of someone's body after, a domestic assault, with interpersonal violence or sexual assault, just different types of crimes, gunshot wounds. There's different types of training for that. So my specialty was learning how to take care of kids specifically who had been sexually assaulted, which most people are like, that is the worst job I've ever heard of. And of course, it can be extremely hard and traumatic, but it can also be very rewarding. And so I
sure.
really
What,
enjoyed being. Oh, go ahead.
what's a kid? What's the
A
age?
kid, right? So I've taken care of patients. We see them 0 through 18.
18?
Um, and sometimes we would see young adults too. We would make exceptions, if there was a special circumstance, like they were developmentally delayed or something like
Okay,
that.
okay,
But I've seen every age from a 3-month-old to, someone who's almost an adult.
okay.
So I started my business Paradigm Shift about a year ago. I decided to step away from the nursing management world for
Wow, it's a
several
big
reasons.
step.
A huge step. It was terrifying to go from working in a
Sure,
corporate hospital to starting my own business, which I know nothing about starting a
right,
business.
right,
So,
scary.
but I just felt this deep sense that I wanted to have a bigger impact in being able to educate and bring change to our healthcare systems and to healthcare workers in understanding these different trends I'm seeing. And I couldn't do that just being at one hospital. So to branch out on my own, I'm able to really have no conflict of interest, and be able to reach out more broadly.
Right, okay. So you were working as a nurse for how long before you started this business?
That's a good question. I've been a nurse almost 15 years now. So
Hmm.
I'd worked in a hospital about 13, 14 years before I stepped out. And I actually do still work at the hospital every now and then, just as a regular, SANE nurse. I haven't quite let it fully go, but I'm completely out of management roles and things like that.
So you mentioned disturbing trends in your work there. So what sort of things were you seeing, and what did you make of that?
So the two main things that really started to shock me, and I actually saw them on the same day, I'll never forget. And I just felt like, why didn't anybody prepare me for this?
Mm,
So the first thing that I was seeing a lot of as a brand new SANE that no one had talked to me about was the amount of kids who are sexually assaulting other kids. So in our program, we write down the perpetrator's age, so if it's a 70-year-old or 32-year-old or whatever, we're documenting that. But that's not what I was writing down. Every time I saw a patient, I'm like, the perpetrator is 11, they're 13, they're 12, you know. And so I think that was the first thing that I saw was like, why are so many kids,
sure.
acting out these sexually violent ways? And I'm not talking about like normal sexual development. This wasn't like a kid a 3-year-old that, showed his private parts to another kid on the
Mhm,
playground or whatever.
mhm,
I mean, talking about actual
mhm.
fits the definition of sexual assault. So I was very confused by that. And then I was also seeing a lot of kids who were coming in saying they were sexually assaulted, but there was actually another component of exploitation. So whether that was trafficking, their assault being filmed and distributed, like it wasn't just sexual assault. There's this
Right,
whole exploitation sort of element to it. And of course, now looking back, I know these things are very much intertwined, but I
yes,
think for me, it felt like no one I had no education around this whatsoever.
Yeah.
And so as I started to dig into our patients' records and start to hear more disclosures, I started to see the way pornography was just at the root of all of these things that I'm starting to see with patients in terms of the level of violence, the exploitation, the young kids acting out. I mean, there's a huge connection to pornography with a lot of those trends. And I think probably the nurses training me had not made these connections yet. And so it wasn't a part of, the course material at the time. It is now for our nurses,
Right.
but it just was something I just don't think maybe those dots had been connected yet.
So give me an idea of the line of questioning you do with a 6-year-old to get this information out, and how does the word pornography, because some kids I imagine don't even know what that word is. So what are these conversations sounding like? And did you
Yeah,
just sort of improvise this as you went along? Like was
that's
no one else, like surely you weren't the first person that came across this? Sorry, I just asked you like 4 questions. So
that's fine.
go ahead.
Just
Yeah.
remind me if I don't cover all of them. So
Okay.
what's really interesting about this is we actually don't question patients who have not gone through puberty yet. So, if a 6-year-old comes in, either we're seeing them because they've disclosed to someone else, or there's a symptom, or it was witnessed. So the information actually that we were getting related to pornography was coming from caregivers a lot of time. And so where I started to make that
Oh,
connection was, I had so I was telling you, I saw this on the same day. I had this 5-year-old patient one day. Her 12-year-old brother had sexually assaulted her. The dad walked in and saw it. So like there was no question about what happened. It was a
okay.
witnessed event.
Clear cut. Yeah.
And so of course the parents are completely traumatized, totally understandable. And as I'm talking to them, they're saying, well, our 12-year-old son is now, he used to be interested in school. He's not interested anymore. He's just locking himself in his room. He seems depressed. Oh, also, we found violent pornography on his phone. Do you think these things are related? And in my brain, it was like light bulb went off. Like, of course they're related.
Yeah.
Of
Yeah.
course,
Yeah.
all of these things are related.
And it's the phone
So,
that their parents bought them and gave them with no filters, unrestricted
exactly.
access, and a
Yep.
bedroom to go into, which quite
Yep.
likely also has a gaming console or some type of iPad or computer.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly. And for parents to say, okay, we found this on their phone and we gave the phone back. Like we put a filter or we gave them a lecture or whatever, and we gave the
yeah,
phone back.
yeah,
So I think that was the moment really for me that changed everything, where I was like, of course, pornography played a role in what I'm seeing. And so honestly, what I started to do and what the nurses I worked with started to do is we started to ask caregivers for younger kids, if they knew the perpetrator. Have they ever looked at pornography? Have you found it on their devices? Have they ever talked about it? And more often than not, it was coming out, oh yeah, we did. We found porn on their iPad. We found porn. They got in trouble at school for looking at it, whatever it may be. So that's how we started to make the connection with little kids. With older kids, where of course pornography is a lot of times a factor with, say, like teen on teen sexual assaults, we started asking the teenagers. And so I usually would start off just with, do you know, if I say the word pornography, do you know what that means? If not, I can, give them a pretty simple description. Have you ever seen something online that makes you uncomfortable, or, where people are in sexual poses, or, sort of trying to make it as appropriate as we can for an 11, 12-year-old. But
sure.
of course, most of them have already seen this. Um, and then just asking questions around that. Were you shown pornography before your assault by this person? Did they send you naked pictures? Did they ask you for naked pictures? Did they record the assault? Did they take pictures during the assault? Um,
So
you
this is
know,
the older children that you're asking these questions, like
yeah.
11 and
So
older,
we'd say
12 and older,
about 12,
12 and
12
older.
and
Okay. Just because they're cognitively developed enough that
yeah,
sort of give
exactly.
coherent answers. Okay.
And we're already typically, again, it's, case by case, but asking them difficult questions about their assault, kind of what body part touched you. So it feels like if we're able to build rapport to ask that, I think it's important to ask about pornography as well.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, it just incredible and so sad, the disclosures that come out. So we had a 12-year-old girl who came in. She had been sexually assaulted by a 16-year-old she met online. Horrifically violent assault. She had actually skipped school, and met this guy in a parking lot where this had happened. And when school realized she wasn't there, sort of when the things became unraveled, and she disclosed what had happened. In her words, they had had sex. Well, of course, she's not old enough to consent. And so one of our nurses was talking to her, and she was swearing up and down, even though this was a violent assault where, he strangled her and was very forceful. She's saying, we had sex, I wanted to, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
So our nurse asked her, have you ever seen pornography? Sure enough, she said, yes, my parents gave me an iPad when I was 5. I accidentally stumbled on pornography. I look at it and masturbate to it every single day. And I have to, right? So she's describing these like addictive kind of things. I have to.
Yeah.
She's been doing this for 7 years and she's 12. So she didn't think what happened to her was sexual assault because she's watching sexual violence,
because porn is sexual violence in many cases. And I hear from people, Melinda Tankard Reese, Daniel Principe, a couple activists in Australia, probably came across them. They hear stories like this all the time, and young girls think that's sex. Being choked, hit, slapped on, oral on the first date, that's sex.
Yep.
So what's happening is they're learning their ideas and their conceptualization of sexual intimacy from the world of degrading and objectifying and dehumanizing pornography, right?
Exactly. And honestly, to that point, I would say the trend that all of us frontline workers are seeing is the way that females in particular are being affected by this narrative, by the sexual script, and that historically, I think we always thought, okay, boys are the ones watching it. They're the ones acting it out. They're the ones doing these things without consent, but now what's happening, the script is getting flipped where I'm hearing anecdotal stories where girls are saying, I will not have sex with you unless you strangle me, unless you ejaculate on my face, unless you, do whatever, record this, because it gives them street cred because they're having
they're savvy and they're up with what they're with what's up, and probably they're in their mind that this is what turns guys on, this is what guys want, this is what guys need, right? And I'm glad you mentioned about the woman because or the young woman, the girl that got the iPad and masturbated every day for 7 years, because a lot of people think this is mostly a guy problem and women don't get addicted to porn. Well, women have a reward center that excretes dopamine just as much as anybody else does, and they can get addicted to that brain cookie, right? Biologically speaking, as much as the guy can. So I'm glad you brought that up. So so of the people you're talking to, give me a ratio, like a percentage of how many cite pornography as a factor in the abuse.
Oh, that's a good question. It's been a long time since I looked at our data, but around COVID, we were looking at, how often was pornography playing a role in some way, shape, or form. And we found about 1 in every 3 cases that we were seeing at the time, there was some type of, especially with our adolescent patients, whether it was porn was sent to them beforehand to groom them, whether, it was filmed, whatever it may be, whether it was posted, on Snapchat. Pornography played some role in their sexual assault and
one in 3, you said?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was curious about that. I interviewed a guy a few years ago who was he was a police officer, and for 1.5 years he interviewed children who were victims of sexual assault, 12 and under. So that's all he did for 1.5 years, burnt them out. And I said, in all of those cases that when you talk to those children, how often was pornography involved, like the perpetrator watching it or the child watching? Because he dealt with both child on child and adult on child, 100%.
I believe it, honestly. I believe it.
I think 1 in 3 is really low. It's just
I do too. I think we're just not able to ask, especially with our younger patients, or we don't get to talk to them,
or they're afraid to
quote unquote
disclose
that. Exactly.
Okay, so who are the perpetrators here? Holly?
Yeah.
Heidi? I called you Holly. Sorry, Heidi.
Oh, it's totally fine.
Yeah. Who are the perpetrators? Is it a sibling, an uncle, a parent, a step-parent, online stranger?
It really varies. So of course, most younger kids are groomed and sexually assaulted by someone that they know. And
Yes.
so I would say with our littler kids that we see, it is typically someone who has easy access to them. So when we're talking about child on child sexual assault, yes, siblings is a very high percentage, cousins. I just took care of an 8-year-old boy not long ago, and it was his neighbor who had invited him over and assaulted him.
An adult neighbor?
A 12-year-old.
A 12-year-old neighbor invited
Yes.
an 8-year-old over.
Yes. And the 12-year-old's mom walked in and saw what had happened. I would guess pornography was probably an influencer there, but when I talked to the 8-year-old's mom, she had no idea, if the 12-year-old had ever seen anything. So yes, I would say it's more siblings or people have easy access, sometimes classmates with our younger kids. However, with our adolescents and our teenage, population, I feel like a lot of the time it is changing where they're meeting strangers online. It's people who are grooming them through social media that end up sexually assaulting them. Or, that does happen a good percentage of the time. Sometimes it is still people they know, whether it's a classmate or, mom's boyfriend, or, it can also vary, but we see a lot more of the social media stuff happening with the teenage population.
Like any apps that are particularly notorious that come to mind, or
So
okay, please share.
Snapchat is
Snapchat.
a huge offender. I cannot tell you the amount of kids I've taken care of that have been sexually assaulted because they met someone on Snapchat, and also just the amount of kids whose sexual assault, whose rape is filmed and then distributed on Snapchat. So for example, we took care of a 16-year-old girl. She had been drugged and raped by a 17-year-old classmate. She did not remember her sexual assault, but when she went to school the next day, everybody had seen her rape before she realized what had happened because he had filmed it and sent it to all his friends on Snapchat. I can't imagine how traumatizing that would be.
You'd have to leave this. You'd almost have to leave school and move
Yes.
away to a different town.
Right,
Like
exactly.
you never get away from that at that age.
Right.
That'll follow you forever
Yes.
in high
And
school.
I think too, just there were so many parts of that disclosure that were nauseating, but I think just the reality that people were showing her, so she came and sought treatment. But none of the kids who received this video called the police. No one told their parents. So again, I think it's that sort of porn desensitization that I look at porn all the time. So when I see this happening to a real person,
It's just
there's a
another porn
complete
movie.
disconnect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is one of the most disconcerting things you've said to me so far. That complete lack of shock and horror.
Yes.
That lack of a human reaction to something that's obviously being shared without her, on so many levels. Okay, she's drugged, she's raped, it was filmed, it was
Right.
distributed, and there's no empathy here.
Right.
This is really, really disturbing to me in terms
Very.
of how the next generation is developing emotionally and mentally and psychologically.
I agree. The lack of empathy is the thing that I think distresses me the most as
Right.
well.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are we creating a generation of sociopaths?
Yes. In
Right.
some ways, I think
Right.
with the sexual script that they're learning, they are
Yeah.
watching
Yeah.
sexual violence where there is no attunement, there is no mutuality in what they're watching. And so to recreate that is this very violent, one-sided,
Yeah.
lack of empathy type of sexual encounter.
Well, and then I'm wondering, of course, it's easy to demonize the guy that did the drugging, raping, and sharing of the video, but
Right.
and obviously it's deplorable. But I'm curious what's going on with him. What's his story?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Has he been
Right.
watching women being drugged and raped since he was 7 or 8 or 9 years old,
Yep.
and had no one to guide him or approach him or have a conversation with him? Heidi, with the guys I work with that have compulsive sexual behaviors, you know how many of them had parents or caregivers that sat down with them and had open, honest conversations about sex and porn? You want me to give you
I'm
a
guessing
percentage?
0.
It's like 2%.
Wow.
Let's
Yeah.
just say 0. Practically speaking, it's 0.
Yeah. I'm
Right.
sure. I'm sure.
Right. And this is before the smartphone, which changed everything.
Yes. Right.
Oh, yeah. Well, I kind of expected to be bothered by this interview because, we're talking about children. Like, it's bad enough. I mean, I hear stories of rape and abuse all the time as a therapist, but
Right.
it's bad enough when it's children. And then it's almost emotionally like when you hear then of other children, like when an adult does it, it's sort of like you have a way to conceptualize that as like, well, they're a pedophile or they're sick or they're
Yes, right.
a deviant or whatever, but I don't think people know what to do with you're 10 and you try to, anally rape your 6-year-old brother with a toilet plunger,
Right.
which was a true
Right.
story that I heard from this former cop.
Oh,
If you watched it in porn.
oh gosh.
Like, what do you do with that? Right.
Right.
This is why I think it's so important that we talk about this because um, we need to address it on many levels, and that's not going to happen until we actually aware that the problem exists, right?
Mhm. Yes, I
So,
agree.
yeah, and so like, I just want your take on like to me, why is it important that and people might be watching this going, okay, so they saw some porn or they found it on the computer. Like, why is that important? And are you saying that every kid that watches porn will rape another child? No, or not. I don't. You're not saying that, and I'm not saying.
Correct. Right.
But here's my take on it. Like just thinking of it developmentally, okay. And I want to hear what you think. But children learn by observation and imitation.
Yes.
That's essentially it, I think. I don't think it's much more complicated than that, right? So, that's why, if you're training a dog and the dog's bad and you slap it on the nose, the next thing you know, the little 4-year-old's going over and going, bad dog, and slapping
Yes,
it on the nose too, right?
exactly.
Because they see, they imitate, and that's how they learn and how they start
Yep.
to conceptualize the world. So I don't, what do you think?
I completely agree. I heard a pediatrician one time talking about mirror neurons and exactly that
Oh, sorry,
concept that
that's
you're
the
saying.
technical term actually I was
Yes.
looking for. Yes. Yeah.
And you described it perfectly that and kids don't their brains don't know that when they're watching something that it's not like they think it's actually happening to them. And so, to think about like they're watching it and their little mirror neurons are going. And so, what happens when the first time they ever experience anything that's to do with sex whatsoever is this horrific, violent, dehumanizing act? Like, what does their brain do with that? And how do they know this is not how I should behave? Like, they haven't
Yes.
been equipped with any of that. And so I think I totally agree. They're imitating what they've seen, and there's some part of them because they have no context for it that they think that's what's expected. And so I do feel a lot of compassion and empathy for kids that have been culturally groomed by the porn industry that do act out because I think they are also victims on a certain level. Like, of course, they're creating harm and trauma for the person they assault, but I think there is some level of responsibility that we as adults have to take when we gave them this device or whatever it may be, full of this horrific content. What did we think was going to happen?
Yeah. 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 I know like most parents wouldn't think of when a kid turns 10 to just hand them a pack of cigarettes and a lighter and say, hey, this is fun. This is what grown-ups do. Or,
Yeah.
or hand out bags of cocaine in high school at the door just for fun. But
Yes.
that's essentially what you're doing when you hand out the black rectangle,
Yeah.
or what I refer to as the portable electronic delivery device for pornography,
Yeah. Exactly.
right? It must frustrate you to no end to just be faced with the lack of awareness among
Yeah.
parents, right?
It's frustrating. It was, I guess, back to your point, I will say, like, of course, not every kid who sees pornography is going to go on to sexually assault another
Sure.
kid. There's other things that contribute to it, like kids that have attachment disorders are higher
Yes.
risk, kids that um, maybe have like an inability to control their compulsions and don't have coping
Yeah.
skills. And, they're, of course, going to be more at risk that when they see pornography, they're going to act it out.
Yeah.
But I would say what breaks my heart is when I see kids, and I see a lot of kids like this, that they have no healthy adults in their life. They are, like I
Mm,
took care of a 14-year-old a few weeks ago who no parent with her in the ER. She had been sexually assaulted by mom's boyfriend that morning, and mom beat both of them up. So mom's not there. She's in trouble with the law. Obviously, boyfriend's in trouble. She's by herself. This poor kid was so neglected. She looked like she hadn't showered in weeks. She just looked miserable and just so desperate for love. And what does she have in her hand? A phone. So it's just like, you think about, she's just there for the taking for any predator who will give her the slightest bit of attention, or even to think about, like, going to pornography because it feels comforting, because there's nothing else.
Of course.
That again just feels so, to me, like gut wrenching. To, as a nurse, I can't walk in there like, you can't have your phone. It's the only thing bringing her comfort in that moment, but it's terrifying. And so I think, yes, with those kind of kids, it really scares me, because I feel like we're really, like you said, we're just inviting predators into a vulnerable kid's life. But I think on the other hand, then we do have parents who think that they are protecting their kids or know everything and still give them a phone when it's, like, it's, to me, in my mind, the good things about technology and a phone do not outweigh all of the dangers that I'm seeing happen to kids.
Yeah, I was just having a talk with a client today about, well, it's sort of an ongoing conversation I have with a lot of clients, and it's not necessarily about porn, it's about gaming and apps and social media and
Yes.
this whole, like, we were talking about, I built this table and I posted it online and I didn't get a lot of likes, and then I was depressed, and then it's like, what am I doing that for?
Right.
Like, why am I looking for fake validation from people I don't even know, right?
Yes.
And adults fall into it too, and I fall into it. Like, Heidi, you seen these reels and on Instagram and YouTube shorts? I think I blew a half hour of my life the other day away on that, just scrolling through that stuff, because
Yeah.
it's literally designed by neuroscientists and
Yes.
psychologists to hook into me and draw my attention. That's the commodity of
And
2020,
it
is
works.
your attention, and it works, yeah.
Yeah.
And then thankfully something kicks in and it kind of goes, Paul, snap out of it. Like, what are you doing here?
Yep.
So is there sort of a profile, like a demographic, or like what we would call comorbidities, in counseling, like low income, or single family, or parents with drugs or addictions or mental health issues, like, and we all know that
Yes.
these things are never as simple as, oh, this one thing leads to this one thing. Like, there's a lot of levels to that. But what sort of, were you able, in the 1,500 cases, give us like a typical profile, say, of a high risk person?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I will say there has been research actually recently done on this. There's a group called Culture Reframed, and they
Yes,
have
yeah.
an
Oh,
academic library, and they did
I,
a study
I'm
on this.
I'm interviewing Mandy Sanchez from Culture
Wonderful.
Reframe
I
next
love
week. You know
Mandy.
Mandy?
I just met with
Okay.
her this morning.
Oh, okay. Oh, awesome. Yeah, I've never met her, just corresponded, but I love their work. So people that are listening, Culture Reframe, go Google it. Great resources.
Yes,
Yes, please
they're
go ahead.
wonderful. So they have an academic library, and they have a study actually on sort of this profile. So I don't, off the top of my head, I don't remember all the different characteristics, but I would say anecdotally. So what I've seen in just the, thousands of kids that we've seen pass through our doors over the last few years is, I would say the number one thing is, it's kids who don't have healthy attachment to an adult are so vulnerable to either, looking at pornography compulsively, or being vulnerable to being victimized or exploited in some way, of course. And
Right.
so I think the sad reality is that there are a lot of kids in our world who, maybe they have a parent who's physically present, but they're not there, they're on their phone. They're not looking at their kid, they're not attuning
Yeah.
to them. And I mean, I've seen every family dynamic under the sun, but a lot of kids have parents that have never processed their own trauma, have not, ever dealt with their own, I would say, abuse and things like that. And so they're not parenting well. Even
Yeah.
if they have the best intentions, they're not parenting well. And so I'd say those kids, the ones that are growing up with parents who are either detached or distracted or busy or have 3 jobs, or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
I get there are difficult circumstances, but
Yeah.
that don't have a parent there that are engaging and attuning to them, I would say
Yeah.
that's probably the number one thing I see in
Okay.
terms of vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and just to explain the attachment for people that don't know that word, but essentially what it means is the bond that a child forms, usually by age 3, with a caregiver, and it can be anxious, it can be secure, it can be avoidant, and it has to do with the consistency of the attunement and presence of the parent to attend to the child's emotional needs and physical needs. So essentially, if you have an emotionally stable, consistent parent who more or less shows up for you most of the time and is there to provide nurture, warmth, comfort, praise, affirmation, encouragement, and security, you're going to probably be okay as a human being when you grow up. And even if there's just one and you have a secure attachment, two is better, but you're probably going to turn out to be okay. So without that, it's sort of like, what is it like, Heidi? It's like more vulnerable. It's like
Yeah.
chinks in your armor or holes in your clothes or something. It
Yes,
just exposes
exactly.
you to these things, right? So yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. So, oh wow, okay. So how is it, and I've been thinking about this for a couple of years, and when I interviewed this guy was a former police officer. I'm like, the cop, like when cops are processing, like through that whole process, sexual assaults, rape, charging people, you know, do they ever even ask about pornography? Like, does that word come into it? And it's no, I don't know what it's like in the
No,
States, right? It's no.
no, absolutely not.
So I'm like, and the equivalent in my world among therapists is like therapists do intakes, right? And we ask all kinds of questions, family of origin and addictions and drugs, alcohol,
Right.
gambling, porn, no. Chat
That's
rooms, no. Paying for
fascinating.
sex, no. Masturbation, no. Cam girls, no. Strip clubs, no. Massage parlors, no. Paying for sex, no. Nothing.
Interesting.
No, and that's because there's not a graduate school that I've come across here that has a single component on compulsive sexual behaviors or pornography addiction. So all the therapists that are graduating don't know anything about it,
Right.
right? And I've had last year, I had 2 interns come through my office, 2 young women, they're gonna be great therapists, and boy, did it open their eyes.
I bet.
Oh, yeah, and they're all about it now, they're very interested. And I mean, not necessarily specializing in like I do, but I'm so proud because they actually ask guys in sessions, how much porn do you watch?
That's amazing
Oh
and
yeah,
needed.
but a lot of therapists aren't comfortable doing that.
Right.
And I think maybe female therapists asking a man, it feels somewhat intrusive. It's like, no, start asking. It should be
Yeah.
like drugs, alcohol, pornography. It should
Yes.
just be right in there with everything else. So how did you, because it sounds like I'm listening to you talk, and it sounds like you sort of like you're there, you're seeing like hundreds and hundreds of these kids, and you're like, am I the only one that's like asking these questions? So
Uh-huh.
how did you start to, did you go to doctors, administrators? Like I'm picturing you having a lot of conversations with a lot of different
Yes.
people. How did you, sort of get the ball rolling on, taking this seriously? And because I know you've implemented a protocol now where they literally hospitals have changed their protocols to start to ask these. Go talk about that process maybe, because I'm really curious about how you affected that.
Sure. Yeah.
Mm.
So I can relate very much to what you're saying, and that, as we talked about earlier, of course, we didn't talk about pornography in nursing school. I mean, and I'm sure nursing schools still aren't. I actually just talked to a therapist the other day, and he said, I'm starting to question everything I learned like in university because, related to
Good. That's
pornography and
probably a good
sex
thing.
buying. Right. And I was like, I agree. The way that a lot of these things were framed are so different from the reality. And it feels so insidious because here we have so many people in our society struggling with pornography addiction and trauma around that, and no one is addressing it or learning about it. And so
Yeah.
it feels crazy making. But
Yeah.
okay, so I started seeing all these trends, and right around that same time, I went to a conference where the speakers were presenting about sort of how pornography is affecting our culture. And so Gail Dines, which she's the one who started Culture Reframed, she's
Oh yeah,
incredible.
her book Pornland blew the lid right off for me. That was
Yes,
the beginning for me of like my eyes opening to how all this stuff's connected.
agreed. Me too. It was
Yeah,
so helpful for me. So
yeah.
hearing her speak, I was like, it just for me felt like all these dots connected, that I was like, this is exactly it. Like, I have to raise a red flag at work and say, we have to start doing something about
Good for
pornography.
you, Heidi. Like that takes courage though, because like you're paddling uphill against the status quo,
I
and you're.
had no idea how hard it was going to be,
I
or it
know, but
probably
I
would have
mean, I can
scared me.
imagine. But yeah, how hard? What? Tell us about that. How hard was that?
So thankfully, that the immediate program that I reported to, they bought in quickly. They agreed because they're seeing the same trends. They're like, yeah, let's do it. Let's ask questions about it. Let's start collecting data. They were very supportive, but kind of outside of that small group, no one was really interested in investing and making big changes in the hospital and bringing in speakers. I mean, they just kind of, I feel like, sort of blew me off, you know.
Sure.
So what finally I was able to touch base with my medical director, and she agreed. She's like, I do think this is important. I think that this trend is real. And so we actually met with a news reporter and we did a news story about it. And
Nice,
it
nice,
went viral basically. This was in
nice.
2017.
What's that time frame from like, hey, I got to do something to the news story, like six
It was
months,
about a year and a
a
half.
year and a half. Okay.
Yes.
Of you
So,
banging your head against the wall, basically.
yes, exactly. And
How did you
really,
keep, what kept you going?
I think the fact that I kept seeing it, it's like wasn't just like I saw this once and then it went away. It was like
Yeah,
every time I'm getting called in to see a patient, there's some element of pornography, and I feel ethically like I have to stand up and say something,
hmm hmm
Um, so at the same time, I had written to like different organizations doing work around this, like the National Center on Sexual Exploitation in the United States.
Nicosi, yeah, yeah.
And said like, hey, I'm seeing this trend. And they were like, oh my gosh, we want to talk to you. So I felt like I started to get traction from other people kind of outside of my sphere of influence saying, we agree, we're seeing it. How can we support you? So we did this news article and it got picked up by tons of different news stations, different news outlets. I mean, viewed thousands of times, which I was not expecting at all. Like I thought people would just ignore it. And so that really opened a lot of doors for me. And so Gail Dines actually reached out to me and was like, hey, I saw your news article. I'm not hearing any medical people talk about this. I'd love to meet. And so I think that was just the beginning of lots of different partnerships, and realizing there actually are quite a
Nice.
few people who are concerned and who are doing similar work. But I would say
Yeah,
within the medical community, it's slowly, I think minds are being changed, but it is an uphill battle. And I have
yeah.
had plenty of resistance on multiple levels. I presented at a big prestigious conference in January, and some of the evaluations I got back were harsh. I mean, like
Like
very
what do you mean?
personal. They said that
So sorry, who was the audience? What was
it
the
was actually therapists,
therapist?
and it was a child abuse conference.
A child abuse
And
conference. Okay.
right. So
And what?
I thought, so I was talking essentially about this topic, which I've
Yeah.
presented on multiple times, kind of talking through how, and there's quite a bit of research. Well, I wouldn't say quite a bit. There's a decent amount of peer-reviewed research on this topic now. Like we know pornography harms children. It's been reviewed, like and published, and like it's an established fact. So I presented, and a few people, I mean, it wasn't the whole group, but it was a few people who were very harsh. They said that like my presentation was not research backed, that I was, giving sensationalized information, that I was exploiting patients by talking about the trends I was seeing, just that they felt like I was basically like an anti-sex prude kind of person. It was
Yeah.
very harsh, very
I can probably reliably tell you that those therapists are all part of ASECT. You know who they are?
yes,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
right.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm
Have you
sure.
come across that? Because they will defend it to the porn to the death.
Yes, here and there I've come across it, and that was probably my biggest experience with getting those evals back. I was like, but I'm talking about kids. I'm not
Yeah,
even
yeah.
talking
Well,
about adults.
and the whole research thing, like this is what gets me because research follows anecdotal evidence,
Yes.
not
Yes.
the other way around.
Correct.
Okay, so you're the one. This is why I don't care, Heidi, if you how many articles you published that are peer reviewed. You are the
Right.
one that's been there on the front lines, personally speaking
Yeah.
and hearing stories of these people. And you seem like a very trustworthy person to me, with no agenda but to make people aware and to help them, and
Right.
not exaggerating or sensationalizing anything. But of course, if that conflicts with my ideology, I'm going
Yes.
to try to discredit you with oh, it's not research. And that's one of their favorite tactics, by the way. And they have their
That's good
body
to
of
know.
research that says, oh, porn's harmless, there's no such thing
Yes.
as addiction, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm like, yeah, and the doctors put out studies in the 50s that smoking was good for you. So
Right.
research it. There's a lot of corruption in academic research, by the way, for people that are listening.
Oh, yes, I
Okay.
agree.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because I just finished doing a literature review. I'm working on a project looking at best practices around essentially exactly what I've been trying to do for the last few years. Like, how do medical people talk to kids about pornography? What is the best practice? How do we do this in a way that's trauma informed? Because nothing exists. So I'm working on this project, and so I finished this lit review, and it was so interesting reading the pro porn articles, that I was like, okay, I know for a fact this is not true. But even just looking at like the gaps that exist in academia, in terms of things that haven't been published or people haven't been willing to take on, there's massive gaps in terms of what we need,
Yeah.
for sure.
Well, and then my thought that when I hear stories like that from those people that wrote those harsh comments,
Yeah.
oh, how much porn do you watch?
Right, exactly. Or I even thought maybe they have kids that look at porn. So what I'm implying is it could lead to your child acting out this way. It's easier to say that I'm a
Yeah,
crazy person
yeah,
than
or
to accept that.
they gave the phone to their 12-year-old
Yes,
years ago, and now they're
exactly.
kind of like, boy, am I a complete idiot? No, no, Heidi's wrong. Heidi's wrong,
Right. She's a
right?
prude.
She's
Yeah,
prude.
exactly.
I don't get the prude. I don't get why you even that ball. Like, it's just so ridiculous. Like, I can't believe that's an insult still. Like, does
I
that actually
agree.
bother you?
No, not at all. And
Um,
I think for me, it just feels like if you spent 5 minutes sitting with a family in a crisis, where something like this had happened,
yeah,
your entire mindset would shift, and seeing the harms that pornography have just decimated, to every
yeah.
child in this family now.
Well, did you have anyone come up to you and be like, "Thanks so much, that was great. Like, I
Yes,
really
I did.
appreciate
I had
it."
lots of
Okay,
people who
okay,
found it helpful and insightful, so it
yeah,
wasn't all bad. But that was
yeah.
kind of, I mean, there is always, my whole point was, I guess, not necessarily for anyone to feel sorry for me. It was,
No,
um,
it's just very interesting how there's that mixed reaction out there still.
that's what I was going to say, is that
Yeah,
for as much, I think, momentum and positive feedback I get from people, there's always barriers as well. I've never stepped into this work and not had at least a few people who have pushed back or not believed me, or made it personal or whatever it may be. I was in a documentary that was created by a couple in New Zealand a few years ago, and they did an excellent job.
Rob, was it Rob and
Yes, Robin Zareen.
I interviewed
Yes,
them.
I love them, they're so great.
Great couple, great couple.
Yes, they were amazing, and they
Yeah,
told me some of the feedback they got after showing their film in New Zealand is that people were saying about my portion of it that, like, I look at pornography and I've never sexually assaulted someone, so like, this lady's a lunatic, basically. But it's like, okay, well, did you start looking at hardcore porn when you were 10?
yeah.
Probably not.
We talking Playboy, or are we talking
Right.
teenage gangbang, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. Oh, yeah, it's so interesting. I did a lunch and learn a while ago, just reflecting on what you're saying. So very small group. I did a course on being a supervisor. So with my college, they like you to have some certain hours of training, and then you can supervise new therapists. So I did that, and the guy, the guy that delivered the training hosts these lunch and learns. And I said, well, treating compulsive sexual behavior, that's always good for. Anyway, so I get on, there's like 10 people. Well, there's this guy, I'm sure he's from ASAC, and he was ready for me. He had
Mm,
no interest in learning anything about
right.
compulsive sexual behavior. So he starts right off with, it's not in the DSM. I'm like,
Right. Of
don't
course.
get me going on the DSM. Okay, just don't.
Right.
Just
Yes.
don't. Okay. That's the DSM is like the Bible for psychiatrists. For those listening that don't know, that every possible mental health disorder is listed in there, and that's what they use to diagnose people. And then he went into, yeah, what do you think about ASEC says there's no such thing as pornography addiction. This is like he's flashing the questions up like within 5 minutes of my talk. And
That's so
then I talk
distracting.
about using polygraphs with my clients, and he says, well, what about this article that says polygraphs are useless? Like, it was like he prepared. I have to give him credit. He prepped for me.
That is a lot of work. Yes.
Yeah. So thank you for prepping. But I got more annoyed than I should have, because I need,
It's
I'm
distracting,
passionate. I'm really passionate, and I need to step back and just not, it's not personal, right?
Right. Yes.
But it's like when you're talking to an ideology, when someone's a mouthpiece for an ideology, do you know what I mean?
Yep.
Logic and reason and research doesn't matter because their mind's already completely made up.
Correct.
And then I had one of the young women therapists go on about ethical porn, and I'm just,
that's always a big topic that comes up every time I present to. Yes.
Right. So I just said that's a stupid made up term invented by the porn industry to sell yet more of their product to women who generally get sick and tired of other women being punched, kicked, urinated on, spit on, and slapped by other men. And a lot of women don't get off on that. So they created this category called ethical porn, where it's like all nice and gentle, and they're like real couples and all that. And then I just went on and talked about something else, right? So I feel, so I hear you. And hey, listen, like I'm open to honest debate, like challenge me. Sure, I'm open to hearing your ideas, right? But like I don't say things like porn, like everyone that watches porn is an addict, or every child that sees it's going to be a sexual predator. Like no one's saying those things.
Right.
But they're acting like we are saying those things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's helpful to hear you say that. Kind of, if there's an ideology that's already there, like it's going to be impossible, no matter what evidence we're bringing to the table, to change those minds most of the time. But I would ask you, I guess, in your experience, like, why do you think there is so much resistance to this, especially if we're talking about kids? Like adults, I guess people can make arguments that it's their choice and whatever, other things, free speech, blah, blah, blah. But if we're talking about kids, why do people still defend it, do you think?
Well, I've thought about this a lot, right? So I think there's a cultural shame that we've internalized in some way that is a shadow of it's a shadow of our culture. It's a dark side that we haven't been able to face. It's sort of like, I don't want to hastily compare it to slavery in the United States, but slavery has been gone for 200 years, and America's still facing their shadow.
Sure. Yes.
The great sin of America was slavery, as some people say. I don't know if that's the case, but you know what I mean, though? And it's like taking 200 years. I mean, slavery's been gone for 200 years.
Yeah.
And people have to grapple with the fact that my ancestors owned your ancestors, as a white guy talking to a black guy, right? So it's sort of like everyone knows we're sexual beings. Everyone knows sex has a dark side. Everyone knows sex can be paired with violence and exploitation and narcissism and all of these things. But what do we do with that, right?
Yeah.
And then so I think when someone starts to speak up, I imagine like the early abolitionists that spoke up vocally against slavery in the South probably had similar things.
Yeah.
Right? You're being sensationalist. You're being crazy. That's not practical. What are you talking about? My slaves are perfectly happy. I feed them twice a day. I don't know, right?
Sure.
And then I think it's the fact that when you're a fish in water, you don't know you're in water, right? It's like that joke, like two fish swim by, the two fish swim by, and the one fish says, "How's the water?" And the other fish says, "What water?"
Right.
So think of you're under 30 today, you're a 30-year-old and under. you have been birthed into, raised, and groomed by a culture that's sexualized in the media, the motion picture industry, pulp culture, the fashion industry, the fitness industry. Did I miss anything? Everything.
Yeah, yeah, you're
Everything.
right. You're right.
Okay? And
Yeah.
now your friend sharing a drugged rape abuse video of a 17-year-old girl in your grade 10 math class.
It's
No
no
problem.
big deal.
What's the biggie?
Right.
What's the
Yep.
biggie? Okay.
Right.
And then there's people that have an ideology goes all the way back to Kinsey,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
who would have been arrested today for the studies he did. He's basically a
Exactly.
pedophile and a sexual abuser and a rapist and a child abuser.
Yep.
Well, that stuff's still there's the Kinsey Institute all over this. They're all over the place.
Yeah, it's true.
So I think that comes from people that need to excuse their own behavior by having an ideology that can justify whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That makes
And,
a lot of sense.
and I'm not, hey, I'm not here to shame. Oh, well, you're shaming. No, I'm not. I'm not
Right.
shaming anybody. Like, listen, I work to not shame people that come in here because they already have enough shame,
Sure.
you know? And you know what I hear over and over, Heidi? Guys come to me and say, well, I saw porn when I was 9 or 11 or 13 or 6. And I'm like, did you tell anybody about it? The answer is always no. Why? Well, I just felt like there was something wrong about it.
Uh-huh.
This is not, because this is what the pro porn people will say. Oh,
Right.
that's religious shaming. These are not people that went to church. These are not
Right.
people that grew up in religious households. Okay. These aren't
Yeah.
Mormons. These
Yeah.
aren't born again Christians. Okay.
Right.
They're just a 9-year-old kid that inherently knows there's something
Yeah.
off about this because they
Yes.
have a conscience and a consciousness.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that makes a
That was
lot
a
of
really
sense.
rambling answer because
No, that was very helpful. Thank you. I
yeah,
appreciate that insight.
yeah. I'm still trying to figure it out, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I agree.
Right?
And I agree with all of those things. And I sometimes feel the shame aspect sometimes when I'm presenting in that. I agree. Like my
Yeah.
intent is not to shame anybody. And I do have so much compassion for those 8, 9, 10-year-old boys that are being
Oh,
exposed to this with no
yeah.
help.
Yeah.
And girls too. But it's like I can see it in my audience sometimes when I'm talking about it, it's like they won't look at me. That it's hard to have these conversations and not have people disengage or be triggered.
Well, I start like I do trainings of therapists, and I was a keynote speaker at a conference before COVID. And so because of that, I start off with a disclaimer. I say, hey
Mm-hmm.
guys, I'm not here to shame anybody. If you look at pornography, I don't think you're a bad person. Okay. Not everyone that looks at pornography is an addict, but I'm
Right.
here to talk about the unwanted compulsive sexual behaviors of people that cannot stop doing this and
Right.
destroying their lives. Let's be clear that that's what I'm talking about
Right.
because they'll bring in so many straw men, red
Yes.
herrings. Like it's endless. And it's like, I didn't say that.
Right.
I didn't say that. Oh, you're anti-sex. When did those words ever come out of my mouth?
Right.
Please tell me when I
Yes.
said that. And that kind of
Yes.
stuff, right? I'm pretty
Yeah.
going guy, but as you can tell, like I get fired up.
That's good. This is a good topic to have a lot of passion about because we need
Yeah,
people speaking out on it.
right, right. Okay, what was the biggest challenge? Actually, no, before I go into that one, so finish the story, I guess, about, you started talking year and a half, the article,
Yeah.
and did it just kind of organically grow and snowball from there? Like, how did you
Yeah. So
start talking to law enforcement and child services and getting asked to go on news shows and, all that?
yeah, it really has just been, I feel like because I was willing to stand up and say, hey, I'm seeing this, I feel like in so many ways, people just flooded my inbox, saying, I'm seeing it too. I just didn't know what to call it or how to address it or what do we do with this information. And so I think the realities are there are a lot of people who care about this and are concerned. I think they're afraid to speak up. I
Okay.
think they're not sure what to do with it. And so I think seeing, someone saying, oh, she's okay with standing in front of all these people and saying it, let's reach out. And so I think that I feel really honored to have had the opportunity to then be able to expand, sort of this work all over the place. So yeah, it feels like just one door is kind of opened after the other, and being able to like collaborate with people in my community around this. We have therapists who specialize in problematic sexual behavior for youth. So that's been really cool, is being able to give referrals either for our patients or their siblings or whoever it may be, so that they're able to get appropriate treatment, which is not something that's readily available, especially in rural areas where maybe there isn't even a therapist in that town.
Yeah,
Much less one who's had training on pornography.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Have you
that
brought
has
a
really
lot of have you brought a lot of nurses into the fold, so to speak? Like,
yes. So
the
I would
nurse?
say with all of the nurses on the sexual assault team, 100% buy-in. They're all about it. They're not afraid to ask these questions. Our child abuse pediatricians are on board too. And then I've been able to expand that out. So right now, which maybe Mandy and you will talk about this, but she and I are working on a project together with Gail Dines right now, and we're bringing SANE nurses in. And again, kind of talking through, what does this look like in our practice? How do we assess this with our clients and with our patients from a medical standpoint? And all the nurses in that project are on board. So it's actually, I do feel like there has been quite a bit of traction within the medical community. I have started a work group at the hospital as well. And so we talk about pornography a lot in our work group too. It's around human trafficking, but of course we know porn plays into that. So we've talked about porn a lot. And I do feel like for as much pushback as there is, there's a lot more buy-in from people than there is pushback. So there's still a lot of work to be done. It's still not, I would say, like a topic that's openly discussed in the medical community, but I do feel like when it is brought up, there's usually agreement of like, yeah, this is an issue. I'll give you a quick example. So a couple of years ago, I was sitting in our emergency department taking care of a patient, and I just happened to hear our social workers talking. They weren't talking about my patient, but I was just in earshot. And they were talking about a 14-year-old boy who had been brought in, and essentially his parents brought him in because they didn't know what to do with him. They had gone to church, and while they were at church, he had, I don't know, sexually assaulted is not really the right word, but he had committed a sex act with the family dog. And so
I've heard of this.
they get home, I want to use the word rape, but I don't know if that's really the right word with an animal. Either way,
sexually assaulted or molested an animal.
Right, yes.
Bestiality, yeah.
Exactly. So the parents,
Like they caught him doing it?
I don't think they caught him. I think they saw what they thought was like body fluid on the dog, and the dog was acting really weird, and then he admitted to it.
Oh, okay.
But they had found very violent pornography on his phone, no surprise. And so I heard the social workers talking, basically saying, well, maybe he has some kind of mental health issue, what do we refer him to? Sort of going back and forth, and so for me, it was an opportunity to chime in and say, like, hey, there's a huge connection to pornography here. Like, we already know it. Parents have already said
they didn't clue into
they
that.
had not made that connection, which is just mind-blowing.
I know, like, and I can't make the mistake of assuming that just because I do this every day that people,
right.
It is still mind-blowing to me that there's such a disconnect there.
Yes. So it's opportunities like that frequently where people just almost just blow past the pornography disclosure element of something, instead of like backing up and saying, hold on, there's probably a connection here to this. We need to address this that is now resulting in this behavior.
Yeah. So what are some of the challenges you faced through all this? Like, I think we've talked about that, like just running into that resistance and
I would say it's
harsh reviews,
Yes, harsh reviews. It's people's own shame. Honestly, I think where I run into maybe getting buy-in is the fact that so much of our adult population consumes pornography. And so I think there's almost this feeling of, I can't really talk to my kids about not looking at porn because I do.
Yeah, right. No, it's a very good point, Heidi.
I find there is that sort of incongruence with a lot of people. Like, I want to support you, but also I want to look at porn. So
Yeah,
I'm good. I don't need your lecture. Thanks.
right. Yeah. Anything else that's been sort of like how about your own internal like if you don't mind sharing a bit, like I'm just listening to you, I feel like disgust, anger, frustration, incredulity. Uh, if I did, almost I could go into some hopelessness and despair if I wasn't careful.
Sure.
Like
Yeah.
what internal, personal, emotional things did you have to overcome, and how, like, did you get support, or like how did you do that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I would say that's probably the number one thing people ask me is like, how do you stay in this work and not lose your mind or
Yeah,
burn out
yeah.
or whatever? Which don't get me wrong, there have definitely been moments where I have felt so burned out and have not like taken good care of myself. But
Okay.
I think that I think it's several things. One, I think that it's not, I think what fuels this passion is that it's not just something I'm seeing with kids at my work. I'm I'm sure similarly to you, seeing the effects of pornography all around me, in my family, with my friends,
Oh, oh,
like their real marriage is falling apart with like, I mean, it's all around me all of the time. And so I think it just continues to fuel that passion of this is so harmful to everybody, to adults, to kids, to marriages, to relationships, to dating relations. Like there's just so many downsides to it. And so I think it just continues to feel that passion of it's really important to talk about this and to be honest. But I think sort of beyond that, I think I really had to learn like what it looks like to take care of myself. And so I think going into this knowing that it is not my job to like rescue or save people,
yeah,
because
that's
I think that
important.
can be the like motivation in this work is that of course we want that sort of like I want to pull this person out of the situation. And I think I probably have had that mindset at times and it just burns
Sure.
you out so fast because you can't. And so I think going in saying, I'm going to do the best that I can in this situation. I want to be a source of safety for this person or whatever it may be. But like, I cannot fix their screwed up family. I cannot like change all the trauma or dynamics. Like, I can just help right here, right now.
Yeah.
Has been a really helpful mindset. It sort of takes that pressure off of like, I'm solely
Yeah.
responsible for the well being of this person, which is crazy and not our job. I think also just having a really strong support system. So there have been times when I've had really good support and times when I haven't. And
Okay.
I think it makes such a big difference, like having friends who understand this and are willing to listen. I had a really rough night a couple weeks ago where I saw like multiple patients back to back. It was at work for a long time. And when I got off work, I had a couple of friends that were like, hey, can we bring you dinner? Can we come over and hang out? Just to have
Beautiful.
that was
Yeah.
such a
Nice.
blessing. And we didn't
Yeah.
even have to like talk about my day necessarily. It's like just to
Yeah.
have human contact and eat and laugh. Like
Yeah.
I felt so much better, after having this traumatizing sort of long experience day of horrible experiences. And so I think having that, for me, I think too, just taking care of my own mental health. So I see a therapist. She does IFS, which is amazing. It's been incredibly helpful to me.
Yeah,
Um,
I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
it's
I've
great.
done a bit of it myself. Yeah. What's this
um,
part want? What's it saying? That
exactly
part?
right.
Mhm.
Yes, they're always talking to
This
me.
part wants to kill those perpetrating bastards, but this part says no, you'll go to
Exactly.
jail.
Right. Exactly.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I think just even working through my own, exactly what's been triggering, what's been hard,
Right. Yeah.
getting those evaluations that were not positive and having to say, okay, what about this is painful? What about it is
Mm.
true? What's not? Why is this triggering? How do I move forward and still be
Mhm.
bold in this? Kind of working through
Yeah.
that with someone from sort of a therapy lens has been really helpful. So there's multiple things I've had to implement, and I don't always do everything, perfectly. There've been
Yeah.
moments where I'm frustrated and mad and want to quit. So
Yeah.
uh, I'm learning, but I do feel passionate and I feel called, and I feel like the times I want to quit, another door just opens where it feels like, okay, I'm gonna step through this and keep
Yeah.
going, because it's so important.
And I just thought of this parable about there's two men walking on the ocean on the beach, and the tide went out and it left like 1,000 turtles stranded on the sand. And this guy's walking along and he's picking up one turtle at a time and throwing them back in the water. And the other guy says to him, "What are you doing that for? Like, it's not going to make any difference." And he says, "Well, it does to this turtle."
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So
And
you do what you
that is the
can.
mindset.
Yeah.
Yes.
You do what you can, which leads me to the next question. Like, do you ever, to me, this is a tsunami that's already hit the coast. Okay.
Yes.
Porn and all the effects of it. So it's already hit. Like, it's not like, let's stop this tsunami. I think it's already hit and there's maybe more coming. Do you ever get overwhelmed with the hopelessness of it all? Like, do you think there's some hope here?
Um, yes and yes. Yes, I get overwhelmed with it and I do feel hopeless sometimes.
Yeah.
There are things that I've seen that feel so hard for me to understand, just the
Yeah.
depravity.
Depravity.
And like we were saying, the lack of empathy. I
Yeah.
will share a story that really rocked me where I just, anyways, okay, long story
Go
short, there
ahead.
was a 14-year-old. She was at a park with her friends, and after school, a bunch of kids hanging out. She went into the public bathroom at the park, and 3 boys followed her in and they gang raped her. So, of course, horrific, traumatizing. They walk out. So she's left alone in the bathroom, and she's like, she knows she has to walk out at some point. So she's gathering herself. She walks out. All these kids around the bathroom at school, they know what happened. They all just heard these 3 boys, were talking about it, bragging about it. She walks out, and the kids at school cheered. They cheered, like they applauded her when she walked
That
out.
not that she was okay, but that she had been raped.
Exactly. Like there was some level of like, this is exciting. You had sex, quote unquote, with 3 boys, whatever. No empathy. No one asked her if she was okay. No one told the police. No one told their parents. It wasn't until she told her mom and brought her to the hospital that we reported it. And I think for me, that was just this gut wrenching moment of what is happening with kids, that a bunch of
Yeah.
14-year-olds are cheering on the gang rape of this child. Like, what is
Yeah.
happening?
Yeah.
And so I think those are the moments where I start to feel really helpless. Like you're saying, I think the tsunami has hit. I think we're barely seeing the tip of the iceberg in terms of the ramifications. I mean, if we have an entire generation that has grown up watching this horrifically violent pornography, I mean, just there's so many places my mind goes of like, what kind of parents are they going to be? And are they even going to be in relationships? Are they just going to date AI robots? Or like, I mean, just what's going to happen to humanity? My mind goes to all these places that are not helpful.
Yeah.
But then I think there is this part of me too that is like, but I see change and hope like in my own life, and I've seen it in other people's lives. Like it is possible for people to heal and have healthy relationships, and not just be stuck in this addiction spiral or coping in unhealthy ways. So I think I go to both places where, okay, there's hope, there's change, people are incredibly resilient, and then there's also this terror of like, I think we don't even know what life is going to look like 5-10 years from now, because this is just this giant experiment where we handed all these kids a phone full of all this horrific content. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, it's scary.
Yeah.
So I feel both things.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And it is a giant social experiment with unintended consequences that we're just beginning to discover what those are.
Yeah.
And I sometimes I use the phrase like unlimited access to porn is the greatest catastrophe of the century and the end of civilization. And people are like, "Oh, that's a little overblown, don't you think?" And I'm like,
I
no,
don't think so.
actually, that's actually not an overstatement, right?
Yeah.
So tell us a bit about paradigm shifts. So I know you're doing some really cool work, like implementing protocols and things like that. You work with hospitals, like, so talk a bit about that, because let's end on a good note, an encouraging note
Sure. Yeah.
of the good stuff you're doing.
Yes. Sorry
Mhm.
to all of your listeners for the very depressing content.
No, I think it's important to be clear and honest. You know, I'm not out to be gratuitously graphic here, but I think we need
Right.
to speak clearly about what the nature of this is.
I
So,
agree.
yeah.
Yeah, so to end on a good note, it has been really exciting being a business owner. I've learned a ton over the last year, and what I thought my business was going to start off to be has been completely different, which
Oh,
is
really?
okay. You know,
Oh,
it's trial and error. So I thought that I would spend most of my time educating hospitals about human trafficking and how to recognize it, um and that has been a little bit.
okay.
But honestly, what's ended up happening is just I've had lots of groups contact me to do consulting, which has actually
Oh,
been excellent. So, like Culture Reframed, I've been consulting with them on a project. I've worked with insurance companies, like trying to see if they can implement protocols around trafficking. I've worked with lots of nonprofits. So it's really just been kind of saying yes to whatever doors are opening. So I've gotten to work on some cool research projects. Some of them around pornography. I mean, so I've gotten to do a lot of cool, it's like every day sort of looks different with my business. Um, Lots of presenting, and yeah, so I thought it would sort of look one way, but I think it's actually been a huge blessing for it to kind of take a different route. And I think I've been able to make more connections and
yeah.
network and spread my message kind of in a different way to different audiences than I thought I would. So right now I'm working on just lots of different kind of interesting projects, all related to either pornography, human trafficking, exploitation, and then doing some training. So I'm actually working with a hospital in Alberta next week. We're doing a training
Oh,
on trafficking.
look
We're
at
talking about
Canada.
pornography, which is excellent. And then, yeah, just different universities and things like that over the next couple of weeks we'll be doing trainings with. So it's never a dull moment. If anybody has any questions about like what I teach, what content exists, things like that, I am definitely open to chat about that and sort of share what knowledge that I've learned and gained over the last couple of years related to all of this, especially from a medical perspective.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'll put the link to your organization, Paradigm Shift, it's called,
Yes.
for those watching.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're watching this and you're in healthcare, you're a doctor, a nurse, social worker, you have an agency and you need training, consulting, Heidi's available. And I mean,
Yep.
you do Zoom calls, you know, with the, like we're doing right now, you know, you don't have
Yep.
to come in person, right?
Exactly.
And I love what you're doing. And especially in this area of healthcare, like you had some wild statistic, like a certain percent, like was it 74% of human trafficking victims go to a hospital, about 4%,
88.
88. Okay.
88.
So say the whole thing for me.
So 88% of trafficking victims will have contact with a healthcare worker while they're being trafficked, and only
88%.
4% of trafficking reports, at least in the United States, come from hospitals. Another research study was just done by the same researcher. Her name's Laura Lederer, and I just talked to her the other day, and she said that only 6% of trafficking victims that she just did a study with were offered any resources from healthcare workers.
So
That
that
is
is the
awful.
definition of a gap. That's a
Yes,
massive gap in that's not falling through the cracks. That's like a giant hole in the floor that people are just basically getting
exactly.
tossed into.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. So let's say
Which
over the next 10 years, you get 100 hospitals that implement these protocols. You could be saving thousands of lives, Heidi.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
for sure, I think it's very much needed. And I think there's a huge connection between everything we're talking about in that. So we're seeing lots of kids come in, you know, to the hospital, maybe for whatever it may be. And when we screen them for exploitation, they are being trafficked through places like OnlyFans or Pornhub, where they're being forced into or manipulated or coerced or whatever into creating pornography that's being sold and monetized on these platforms. And so like these two worlds are so interconnected, that it feels like to train hospitals on trafficking and things like that, you have to pull in this porn piece. Like there's no separating these two things.
Well, it's funny you mentioned OnlyFans because there's this conception that that's like the
Uh-huh.
clean, safe.
Sure.
The girls are all in control of everything. It's
Right.
empowering. I mean, I've heard the word empowering enough times to make me want to throw up over and over. But
Yes.
you're saying that a lot of
I've
women in
taken care of
multi-families
kids
are
who've
trafficked,
been trafficked. Yep.
trafficked.
Yes.
So they have
And
a
this is in the
Mhm.
middle of America, in the Midwest.
Yeah,
If it's happening
yeah.
there, it's happening all over the place.
Well, I'm in a small city called Peterborough, which is 84,000 people. And
Hmm.
we have an organization called Victim Services here, and there I heard a talk a while ago, and it was like 12 girls or 16 girls, just that they know of, that they've helped
Wow.
out of trafficking. And we're just a tiny little city, especially
Yeah.
by American standards. And
Right.
so if they've helped 12 of them, there's probably 100.
Absolutely. It's so much more prevalent than people realize.
Okay, so let's wrap up with I don't know, like what a word of exhortation or encouragement or to what to parents, to healthcare workers. Like we've talked a lot about the lack of awareness, and I'm not slamming parents. And listen, I know
Sure.
most of you out there who are parents are like doing the best you can with what you have. If you're a single mom or a single dad, kudos to you, man, because you have like
Yes.
literally the hardest job in the world. Okay, and I get it. It's easy to, throw the iPad to the kid. It's a instant babysitter. Okay,
Yes.
but what do you want to say to them just to be like, hey, this, it's time to pay attention. Like,
Yeah, that is a great question. I think I completely agree with parents. You have one of the hardest and most important jobs in the world. And I think if you can be willing to put down your own phone and do things with your kids that encourage attunement. So what that means is like looking at each other, reading each other's body language, playing games together, being outside together. Um, those things are invaluable to children. And what I have seen is that when there is that strong bond, those between kids and parents, those are the kids who are less likely to be sexually abused, less likely to be addicted to porn, less likely to be exploited online, all of these awful things that we do not want for our children.
yeah,
You build in resiliency and protective factors when you are able to spend quality time with them and they feel loved and attached and seen by you. And so I think that is so important. I think
yeah,
when kids don't have that, they are the ones that, unfortunately, it's not their fault, but they're targeted by
yeah,
predators, by traffickers, by the porn industry. So I would just say to be intentional about, even when you're exhausted and frustrated and overwhelmed,
mhm,
if you can be intentional to look your kid
mhm,
in the eyes, to spend, one-on-one time with them, that's really, really important.
yeah. And let's say what's your advice to parents who they walk in and their kid is watching porn, or they find this material on their iPad or their phone, and they're kind of horrified and ashamed and
Sure.
embarrassed, what can you
Yes.
encourage them with?
Absolutely. So it's interesting. I just read an article and it was about these researchers asked parents how they reacted when their kids had looked at pornography, when they, found them. And these were young kids, like ages 2 to 12. It was either they reacted with anger, so in some
Yeah.
cases it was abuse. They
Like the
shamed
parents abuse the kids,
the
like got
child.
mad and spanked
Yes.
them or something. Okay.
Right. Yep. Shame.
Yeah.
Some of the parents lied to the kids. So, they were like, oh, what you saw wasn't this. Like, especially with like the 2 and 3 year olds almost trying to minimize it.
Okay.
And then some parents joked about it. Like some parents thought
Yeah.
it was funny, which that reaction kind of shocked me that I was like, yeah, I didn't think about that. Some parents would think it wasn't a big deal that their 5 or 6 year old had seen this content. And then some parents did just sit their kids down, act like it wasn't a big deal, and kind of try to factually go through, this is
Yeah.
what you saw. Do you have questions
Mhm.
about it? And so,
Mhm.
what was interesting is there were like 300 parents in the study. None of the parents found out because they asked the child, are you looking at pornography?
I accidentally found out.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so, what I would say is one, you need to be having these conversations with your kids. If they have a phone, they are going to see pornography. I can guarantee it. You have to talk to them about it before that
Yeah.
happens.
Yes.
Um, do not let them have their phones with them at night. Like you need to be looking
Yeah.
through them. But
Yeah.
if you find the content, and you probably will at some point, I would say the best things you can do is if you can try and remain calm and not shame them. If they feel like you're embarrassed of them or
Mhm.
upset with them or disappointed or whatever, they're never going to talk to you about it
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think if we can try to normalize it as much as possible, like, I know this stuff is all over the internet, how do you feel when you see it? Does it feel
Mhm.
scary? Do you want to see more? Kind of trying to ask questions in a way to be curious about what's going on inside of your child, versus sort of just the let's shut it down and I'm freaked out. But then I
Yeah.
think it's also okay to set boundaries around, hey, it's actually not great for your brain or your
Mhm.
body to see this kind of thing, even though I know it can be interesting, or make you curious.
Mhm.
Here's some things we're going to do just to keep you from seeing that. And if you have
Yeah.
more questions or you want to look at it again, can you come talk to me first?
Yeah.
I think trying to handle it kind of in that sort of way, it's uncomfortable no matter
Yeah.
what.
Yeah.
But I think the more normal you can make it seem, the more they're going to feel safe if it happens again or if they have a question about it versus just blowing up or kind of being like, you're
Yeah.
disgusting. Why would you look at that kind of thing?
Yeah. Oh, I like that. I think it's so important to not handle it with shame and anger because all that will do is teach the child that this is really bad and I can never talk to mom or dad
Yeah,
about it.
exactly.
And I'll just add there, if you're a parent watching this and you struggle with pornography and that holds you back from talking to your child, well, get help for yourself. Send me a
Yes.
message. I work with guys all the time and women to break compulsive pornography. And this isn't a pitch for me. I'm more than busy. It's not like I need more business, but I'll reach out to someone in your area. Okay. And then we use that as an opportunity to be like, hey, maybe I need to work on this so that I can be there in a healthy way for my kid, but still talk to your kid about it. Okay, maybe you feel like a hypocrite, but do it anyway, because they need to hear an informed adult voice that is guiding them through this. You know, like and just like you would about like, why is it a bad idea to shoot up heroin? Why is it a bad idea to take cocaine? Why is it a bad idea to binge drink and then go drive a car? You know, why is it a bad idea to consume vast amounts of hardcore violent pornography? So, and Culture Reframed, we mentioned, go to that website. They'll have
Yeah.
all the resources that you need. One more mentioned Kristen Jensen, who wrote Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. I interviewed her on my channel. Best book for little kids and parents that are watching. I mean, Kristen says, I asked her, when should parents start having this conversation? Like 8 or 9? She says, as soon as they go on the internet, 3, 4, 5 years old.
Yep.
Okay. And the further, if your kids are older than that, it's not too late, but you need to start having those at 4 or 5. Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. It's a great book. Get that, because it's not a matter of if your children will see pornography. It's a matter of when they will see pornography. So
Yep.
awesome, great conversation, Heidi. I love this. I feel like I could, go longer, but I think we kind of wrap it up.
Yes.
Any last thoughts or comments?
No, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor, and thank you to everyone for being willing to engage with such a difficult topic. I know that it's difficult and heavy and hard.
Yeah, and I want to say as well, Heidi, thank you so much for the great work you do. You're a pioneer, you're a trailblazer, and it takes a lot of courage to do what you've been doing. And if I can ever help or support you in any way, please reach out. And I hope a lot of people watch this and listen to your story and feel motivated to also be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. So thanks so much for what you do, and I'm sure we'll talk again sometime. So bye for now.
Sounds great. Thanks.